Thank you, Dennis. Our next speaker is Sue Anthony. Sue Anthony has been a career-long editor and writer, working for nonprofits, especially in healthcare, and for several years was a worship associate here at UUSF. Sue, where are you? There you are.
Thanks. At eighth grade graduation, I was surprised to learn that I had been awarded an honorary title. The class had voted for the smartest, the most likely to succeed, and the best-looking students. The title I received was the most gullible. It was the least desirable of the available honorifics, but I was happy to be acknowledged at all. And I didn't think of myself as gullible, which I now believe is a qualifying characteristic of those who are gullible. Since then, I've proven myself worthy of the title a number of times. Just 3 notable examples. The New Jersey town that I grew up in had a characteristic that I didn't question until years later. The middle-class community was 100% white. It was snow white. Not only were there no people of color, there were no Jewish people whatsoever. Although the adjacent towns had lots of both. When the first Jewish family moved in, Jeannie Zeltzman was in my class. It was a noteworthy event. Gullibility was also on display early in my career when I signed on as a volunteer for the Richard Nixon presidential campaign. My job was painting cardboard signs. None of the women volunteers had important jobs, but it was fun to hear the excited talking, and every night there was a buffet of tuna fish sandwiches and sodas. At the time, I did have doubts about the Vietnam War, but somehow covered it over by assuring myself that our government must know what it's doing. And a final example, years later, when my husband built a family cabin in Mount Shasta, the last big task was to drill a well. We didn't know anything about that, so we consulted several neighbors. They said to hire a dowser to wave a forked stick, apply certain knowings, and pinpoint the spot to drill for underground water. The neighbors agreed on who was the most gifted of the local drowsers. So this gentleman came over and after a bit of magic, indicated exactly where to dig the well. And it worked. It didn't cross my mind that the high water table of the whole area made drilling for water a success each and every time. Gullibility, which I prefer to call naivete, offers certain blessings. It enables one to interact with people and listen fully to their theories on everything. This is a useful characteristic for Unitarian Universalists. Warning sensors are muffled. One can assume that people are essentially decent and what they tell you is likely to be true or true-ish or at least deserves a listening. Like at the theater, one can set aside reality and believe the characters are real. The inevitable downside of naivete is that once you come face to face with reality, the letdown is a hard drop. I won't forget the afternoon that changed everything. Although I grew up in the post-World War II era, there wasn't much talk about the war. I knew little about it until the day I knew too much. It came in the form of a magazine article with pictures describing the experiences of victims in the death camps of Eastern Germany and Poland. In that worn wooden chair at the telephone table in our small dining room, I came to understand that unspeakable cruelty deliberate and planned, was real. Later, I read a great deal about history, both recent and ancient, and saw that much of history deals with cruel acts. Sometimes there was a byproduct of a larger goal, like conquering a city or region. But some cruelty, like torture of witches, prisoners, or others, seemed to be essentially for its own sake. What I noticed was that a single step toward cruelty would lead to others that made it worse. Hangings became burnings, and burnings were worsened by using greener wood to make the suffering last longer. In history, cruelty, like a snowball rolling downhill, picks up momentum as the lines of decency are crossed, extended, and crossed again. I don't think it's naive to say that eventually the tide turns. Enemies are defeated, or in the case of meaningless cruelty, people finally weary of the suffering they've helped bring about or watch from the sidelines. Sometimes it's a photograph, like that of the naked little girl desperately running from fiery explosions in Vietnam. Or it could be words like, "Have you no sense of decency, sir? At long last, have you left no sense of decency?" Sadly, we're not at that point yet. Every day as I read and hear the news, I realize that so many of the things I hold dear are in danger. If not this minute, then probably soon. I think of the institutions that have become bedrock. The dependable blue U.S. Postal Service mailbox at the top of my block. My public library branch, where the staff are so wonderful, it's all I can do to keep from hugging them. The public schools in my neighborhood and all over the city, where every kid is entitled to a high-quality education, regardless of race, gender, language, disability, or any other descriptor. The parks, the college and university systems that preserve a place for critical thinking. The safety of people all around us who lack papers or whose papers might be deemed not good enough. And of course, the journalists, columnists, and news outlets that we count on for information, always the most vulnerable targets in an autocratic takeover. No autocracy or kleptocracy can allow a free press to exist, and none ever has. For the moment, we still have so much that is worth protecting. Last Thursday, during the great rainstorm, my family and I went to a college women's basketball game. When we entered the auditorium, we were cold and wet, and it was immediately clear that something good was happening all around. The energy was palpable. Just before the game, the indigenous tribes of the area were recognized formally. Then the chorus from my granddaughter's middle school sang the national anthem. As the game started, I saw that the athletes on both teams displayed every skin color that humans have access to, as did the cheerleaders and the very large marching band, who all wore silly hats, obviously of their own design. During halftime, kids from a local Hebrew school displayed their own basketball skills. We bought salted pretzels warm from the oven. I found myself smiling. It's hard to think of a moment I've been happier. It would be easy to say that this scene is only available to America's elites or to the so-called woke. But I disagree. I think such things happen all over this country, in tiny towns and cities where the foods may be different, but the feeling the same. Perhaps I'm naive. In fact, it's been established that I am. But I believe that our democracy has something for us that can't and won't be canceled if we join forces as if our lives depended on it. Because we have a chance now. We might not get another one.